All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. All right, so we'll get going here. Great. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Guy McPherson here with my guest, Lauren Dollie Duke. Lauren, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
All right. So Lauren is a writer, educator, entrepreneur, and community activist. She's taught thousands of yoga students over the last 15 years. She's led dozens of international retreats and continues to push the edge between yoga, mental health, and trauma. She founded a one-of-a-kind community center and yoga studio in Encinitas, California. In a sea of corporate yoga where most independent studios don't survive, she created a thriving community, teaching and hosting a variety of sold-out yoga classes, educational seminars, and writing workshops. She devotes her time to helping educate people in the anatomy of trauma and how those experiences are woven into the tapestry of our lives. Lauren has studied with the world's leading traumatologists, Bessel, Peter Levine, Gabor Mate, and Stephen Porges. Her recent memoir was just out in January. Is called Shithouse, a Memoir, published in January 2022. And you can get that wherever books are sold. Lauren, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So you said you've been listening to this during your journey. To say more about that.
Yeah. So I think it was, how many years have you been doing this podcast now?
Maybe like 6.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've probably been listening to it that whole time, but in 2012 or 13, right around that time, I had been in a car accident, but my whole life was basically a car accident. And so I was starting, after that particular car accident, I started having a lot of symptoms in my system that I didn't understand what they were. And I felt like I was going crazy, and I felt like I had no control over my nervous system or my brain. And it turned out I didn't know what it was. It felt like this mysterious thing. And I was really ashamed of it, because I was also like, I owned a yoga studio. I thought I should know how to kind of manage my own system. And I ended up in therapy. I did a bunch of different types of therapy, but I got a PTSD diagnosis. And during that time, I really wanted to understand, like for me, I needed, because I didn't understand what that was or what trauma was, I really needed to understand my own experience. And so I went into like just fully trying to educate myself on what is trauma. And during that period of time is when maybe I first picked up Waking the Tiger, Peter Levine's book. And then maybe, I just went down the rabbit hole of trauma, and one of my teachers, Michael Stone, who has passed, but he was a psychotherapist. He was talking about trauma. And then at some point I found your podcast. And it's really, I've just been on this education journey to try to understand, really the heart of our lived experience, which really is our nervous system. Like we're perceiving the entire world through our nervous system lens, and so that is what really introduced me. Wanting to understand trauma and the nervous system is what introduced me to your podcast and really all of my work. It was the entry point into all of my work.
Wow. What were some of your symptoms that you were experiencing that you didn't understand?
Yeah. Well, I just constantly was in a state of high alert. And so now Stephen Porges has coined this term neuroception. And so our nervous system is always on alert, for its job is to basically protect us. But I didn't understand at that time what it was doing or how I could regulate it. And so I was, every single moment of the day, wow, I felt like I was going to be attacked, or I felt like I was going to be, because it wasn't about the car accident I was in. It was about all of the other things that were stuck in my body, that ultimately that car accident became, the tipping point. And so everything, because I had been living in a world, and I feel like a lot of us are, of complex trauma. Yeah. And so not only, I was having a lot of sight issues. My eyesight became really bad because I became super sensitive to light. I was in adrenal fatigue. I was experiencing extreme chronic digestive issues, which turns out big time symptom because of that connection with the brain vagus nerve to our organs. A lot of digestive issues. And it was really scary. I mean, literally, I just was like, oh my God, am I dying? I just thought I was having a heart attack all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So during this time, you had started a yoga studio?
Before this, yes, I had owned a
Okay.
yoga studio since basically 2009.
Okay. And then
Yeah.
you start having all these experiences
Yep.
and started educating yourself. What did you start to see? What did you start to feel? And how did what you were learning impact you?
Yeah. So what I began to recognize is that trauma is a dysfunction of the nervous system. And when I was able, and now I've been through the somatic experiencing training. Actually, you had Abby, who was one of my teachers, Abby Blakesley. She was on here and you interviewed her.
Yeah.
But I started to like, once I was able to almost like demystify what trauma is and really just distill it in a way that not only I can understand, but lots of people can understand. I realized that was actually the exact template that yoga was helping us understand. And so I began to use my yoga practice and my yoga teaching as essentially a template of and like an entry point into an autonomic conversation. So my yoga practice and my yoga teaching became this platform where I could teach people about how their nervous systems work and really how to pendulate a nervous system, right? So with trauma, it's like people either get stuck up here or they get stuck down low. They can get stuck in freeze responses, dorsal vagal, they can get stuck in sympathetic. And I would kind of, I would get stuck in sympathetic and then go into overload. And then I would get overwhelmed and go into freeze response. Right. And so with yoga, what I started to recognize was like, oh my gosh, everything I'm doing is affecting my nervous system. Everything I'm doing is affecting my brain. Every breath I take is affecting my heartbeat. I mean, all of it is just working on this continuum. And so when I started to shift the conversation of yoga from something that was really mystical to something, because what happened was when I got the PTSD diagnosis, everything that I had been taught about yoga, which was very like a lot of Indian philosophy, a lot of mysticism, a lot of archetypes and deities, that went out the door. Like I didn't know how was I able to translate all of this stuff into this autonomic conversation. Like I felt like I didn't have any hands-on somatic training of like what is happening inside of my body. And I feel like that's basically the foundation that we should be given in not only yoga teacher training, but when people are in school to become therapists and really like a baseline education of mental health when we're young. This is what happens when you inhale. This is what happens when you exhale, because really we just need to learn how to regulate our own nervous systems because that is affecting every other system in our body.
It sounds to me like, you talked about the whole mystical aspect of yoga. I think that many people are familiar with,
Yeah.
but this experience you had feels to me like it sounds like you were able to own your place in yoga and how you could teach it and what it meant to you because you'd gone through this experience.
Well, definitely. But I think what happened is I felt disempowered. I felt overwhelmed because I didn't understand like yoga for me. I just felt like I really had an understanding of philosophy and of mysticism, but I didn't understand my body. And then, so I felt like so disempowered because when that happened to me, when I started having PTSD symptoms, I didn't feel like I could turn to my practice to help me. And that I recognized in that way, yoga failed me. This is my next book, by the way.
Okay.
And with that being said, it led me on this whole other education journey of how can I use yoga as a way, because if I'm feeling this, so many people are feeling this.
Right.
You know, if I'm having this experience because I'm a human, then other people are having this experience. And so it really led me into this educational journey of trying to understand the true somatic experience, which everything is a somatic experience. We are all living in this body that is working on a continuum with our mind, with our energy, with our spirit. And yes, now because my entryway into yoga is so different, it really has helped pave a place for me in the yoga world, as someone who's doing something really unique that I hope ultimately isn't so unique. I hope it just becomes the normal baseline teaching for yoga teachers, because so many people, yoga is so trendy, right? And so many people, like I have access to way more people than a normal therapist per se, because so many people are coming to yoga. They don't realize even why they're coming to yoga, but they can't even articulate it, but it calms people's nervous system down. Or maybe for people who are struggling with chronic freeze response, it wakes their nervous system up. And so people feel like calm and vital and alive. And that's what's so intoxicating. And that's why people keep returning to their yoga practice and the mat. And so, for me, it has changed the way that I'm teaching. I think it's made it more practical for people. And every class ends up basically being a workshop on like, this is how you can use your body, because we do mirror in a basic yoga class, like a basic hatha yoga class. It doesn't have to be some crazy intense. I don't really teach crazy intense vinyasa, but it mirrors the whole spectrum of what we experience in a nervous system. We get high states, we get low states. We do that with the movements. We do that with the breath work. We can do that with just basic visualizations of what's coming up in the mind and notice how that's affecting the heart rate and working with vagal toning. I mean, you just start to see like all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what is happening to me? Like I can control all of this. And that's when it starts to become so empowering, because your nervous system is autonomic, right? It's automatic. But when you start to recognize how you can influence your own system, then all of a sudden you have agency in your own body. And I feel like that is the opposite of PTSD.
Right.
PTSD, you have no agency in your body. You don't even know, you feel out of control. And I just think so many people feel out of control. They might be struggling with just from living in kind of high alert areas and high vibrational energy areas like a city. Their body's on alert all the time, so you get stuck in these high states or stuck in low states. And so all of a sudden, like using yoga as an autonomic template and teaching people how to use their own bodies and how to kind of manipulate their own energy, to me, has been the most empowering experience of my life.
Very cool. Well articulated, I must say. Where does this memoir come in to play?
Yeah. So, through this experience with the PTSD diagnosis, I really was looking for outlets and resources to take care of myself, because what was happening inside of me needed an outlet. And so the book really was an act, even though I couldn't articulate this at the time. It's all just like in retrospect, but, the book was really an act of self-preservation. I needed to find somewhere for my story inside of my body to go. And the fascinating thing about so for some people, it might be art, for other people, it might be, for me, it's exercise too, but like maybe for someone it's surfing or clay, ceramics, that sort of stuff. Like we need an outlet. We need somewhere for our expression to go. Otherwise it goes deeper inside of us. And so I literally just started writing. I wrote because what was happening inside of me was making me sick, And so I was going through therapy and writing simultaneously. What I saw when I started writing, because it's not like when you're writing a literary memoir that you have the intention to publish, you're not just like blah, blah, blah. You're like looking for the story and you're looking for the characters and you're looking for something interesting and, fascinating to carry it all the way through. And so you end up like writing and rewriting and writing and rewriting and writing. And I did this for 7 years. Okay. So the book came out January. People are like, how long does it take to write a book? I'm like, so long. Oh my gosh. Because it's a process like anything else. It's not just like, sure, you could just verbal diarrhea something in 30 days and like maybe it's prophetic, but mostly I think anything good takes like a few years of self reflection. But so the more I wrote, the more I looked at it, the more I worked with other people to see these different perspectives, the more I developed characters, the more the richer the story got, the more I remembered, because this is just how it works when you start to work with memory and neurology. It's like one thing leads to the next thing, and I had to look at the story from a variety of different ways. As I was writing the story and rewriting, I was also going through therapy. So I was experiencing my own healing process. And then the writing process became the healing process as well. Because I had to look at it from not only my perspective, I had to look at it from all the characters' perspectives. And I had to develop the characters and see what the characters went through, which are the people in my family. And that's what really kind of led me to a place of compassion for all the characters in the story, including myself. And that was the most healing thing, like having to really look at everything and look at the people in my family and the things that everyone did. It's like, I realized that no one did anything to hurt me. We're all just having a human experience. I don't feel like a victim anymore. I feel like all of these things happened so I could go through an existential crisis, go through a health crisis, so I could fall apart and ultimately put myself back together so I could be where I am now. So the book writing was like that was probably the most healing thing I've ever done in my entire life, because it forces you to look at everything, and it takes so long that like your mind changes. And then all of a sudden the story starts to change. And that everything you're doing is working when your story starts to change a little and you're not so attached to that same kind of trauma story.
Were you aware, or to what degree were you aware of this story prior to, let's say, the accident, or when you were growing up?
Yeah. Good question. Always. I knew there was a lot, my family, I come from a family of addicts. My father was a bank robber. He ended up almost killing 2 people and died in prison. I was a part of all the belligerence and lawlessness and illicit activities from the beginning of my life. I hid the things my family was doing. It built a ton of shame inside me. I heard things outside that people would say about my family. And just because they said it about my family, I believed that it belonged to me as well. So this is the generational trauma piece. And this is also these belief systems my family members had from their family members. And we were just like passing down these belief systems. I was aware very early on that I was different, that my family was a little messed up, and I was very ashamed. And that shame really, that talk about another generational, belief system, but that shame led me in so many, just so many dangerous situations, because I didn't believe I was worth anything, which even just that belief right there is a nervous system state. It's a depressive state.
Right. And at what age are we talking now?
Probably by the time I was 6 years old, I realized I was different, and I was already like hiding from, like trying to hide the things that my family was doing. And so that was really damaging for me, because that's just developmental trauma. And then that right there really affected every relationship I was in, whether or not I would finish anything, the careers that I was choosing, the jobs that I would put up with, the toxic, abusive relationships, because it was all normal for me. And so to break that is like, it's so hard. You have to have so many good resources around you. And also you have to see it. And that was the thing with the book, is like, I was able to kind of psychologically see it. And with yoga, I was able to physically feel it. And that right there, like that combination and that integration is really what people need to heal. It's like we need the bridge, because so many people are doing CBT, and there's nothing wrong with this, because my somatic experiencing training, which is a 3-year training, 99% of these people who are in my trainings, because I was also doing it during COVID and I could do it internationally, 99% of the people in these trainings were all CBT therapists, and they're all heading towards the body. They're like, okay, we already understand the mind. We're cycling people and circling people back in their same trauma stories. They're not getting better. And now we got to do something different. And so for me, the writing of the book, the creativity, the being able to like psychologically express that and move everything out of my body, along with like in conjunction with a physical practice, like a yoga practice, a breath practice, a meditation practice, helped me heal my nervous system. So it's been pretty amazing.
It sounds amazing. I mean, so is it fair to say that it wasn't until the book that you looked at your story in some depth?
Yeah, well, okay, so let's circle back. So there's a piece of a chapter in the book, and we had just gone with my dad to steal these 3 cars. And we didn't explicitly know what was going on, but we knew what was going on because we'd been in situations like this before. And we were like, but we didn't want to out my dad. We went to the car lot, wrote some fake checks, and we all drove off with the car, right? My dad took off, and me and my sister laid in bed that night, and I was 15 years old. I wasn't even old enough to be driving a car. And I said, one day I'm going to write a book about this. Like, you cannot make this up, right? It's such a crazy story. But the other piece of that story that I wasn't thinking about that at the time that it all happened is what these things do to us, what they do to like our soul, what they do to our minds, what they do to our bodies, our energetic imprint. And, so I got into yoga when I was about, 18 or 19, and I was searching. I was disjointed. I really was, already struggling with a lot of nervous system dysfunction and psychological dysfunction. And I was already on this path where I was trying to find like something that made me feel better, but I didn't really understand from what at this point. And then after the accident, so I already knew I was going to write it starting at 15 years old. But then after the accident was really when I was kind of forced to sit down and write. And when you are writing, you start to all sorts of new stuff comes out up that you didn't even remember was there, because you start stirring your somatic pot essentially, and it's just like, it's a domino effect. One thing taps on the next thing. I mean, this is how EMDR works, and you just remember things, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, so it was really the deep self-inquiry and examination came through the writing of the book.
You talked about, you creating something different within the yoga community, within the yoga field. Say more about that. Who's your audience?
Yeah. A lot of people, which is like, okay, I must be doing something right. Yeah. Okay. So what I recognized very early on was that I've had 5 different yoga studios because properties kept getting bought. I live in Southern California, real estate's crazy. And so I kept having to move spaces after buildings would be sold. And then I would change the name because I would move off a certain property that had that name, right? So by the 5th time around, I recognized that it wasn't really about the yoga. It was about the community. That the number one resource and regulator for all of us is each other. And I recognize that, like in 2016, I'm like, we don't need another yoga studio. We need a community hub where we do a bunch of stuff, and we're not just doing yoga, but we're doing art shows. We're having dance parties. We need a social outlet. So I built a space called Gather, and it became the platform, kind of premier platform here in Southern California, in San Diego for gathering. But it has a different, the infrastructure is different. So it's a co-op, and that is what really makes it different. So all the teachers pay rent to be there. And so we collectively, cooperatively come together around the shared vision. The shared vision is around mental health resources and education. And we teach that, and the teachers pay their rent, and then they keep everything they make. So it allows for, autonomy and sovereignty of the teachers. There's no middleman taking anything from them. It does become, it is really the only place where these educators can make money, make a decent living. So it's like, it calls in the master teachers. It calls in the teachers who have a ton of education and a ton of experience, because it's really built for people who have a following, and the people who have a following are people who've been doing it for a long time, so we're kind of
is your yoga practice studio within this, within
Yeah. So I have a property here in San Diego, and it has 4 different spaces on it, and we just use all of them for different things. So we have the yoga studio, but we do breath classes. We have, neuroscientists come in and teach educational classes. This is your brain on yoga. We have trauma educators like Kimberly Ann Johnson, who wrote Call of the Wild. She also is an SE practitioner. She's spoken there. So we just have lots of people doing lots of different things. We throw parties, like we're having a party on Thursday night. So that's the difference. I'm like, okay, the focus is not the yoga. The focus is not to make money. The focus is each other.
Right. Wow.
So that's the difference. Yeah. Because so many yoga, it's like, if you think about it, and I do feel like this is going to end up kind of, especially post-COVID, becoming the model of the future, because so many studios, it's like the whole yoga and gym landscape has closed down. And so many teachers recognize like, oh, we have our own platforms. Why are we going to a yoga studio and letting them take, more than half of what we make, when really it's about us? Right. And people now, they want to know where their money's going. It's like, I call us the last farm stand in the big old city.
What's the best way for people to get in contact with you, Lauren?
Yeah. So the best way is for people can either go to my website, which is laurendollyduke.com, and Dollie is DOLLIE. And people can email me there. They can go to my Instagram, which is Dollie Duke 83, DOLLIEDUKE 83. And also they can check out more about Gather. The Instagram for Gather is Gather Encinitas. And also the website is www.gatherencinitas.com. And I do consults for co-ops there.
Very cool. You're one of those, you're one of those people. You're like a force. Seriously. I mean, you are, every now and then someone comes on this podcast who just is like, and you're one of those people. I don't mean to minimize you by putting you in a group with other people, because you're obviously you're your own person, but you're a friggin' force, and it's really inspiring. And this is why I do this podcast, because I get to talk to people like you.
Oh, and thank you, because literally, like, I've listened to so many. This podcast has helped me so much. Like, now I love listening to podcasts, and I'm like, yeah, I know that, I've learned that at some point, but like, which is confirming that I've been on a really good educational journey with all the trainings I've done. But in the beginning, like, I literally was like, the people that would come on would be speaking to my own personal experience that I didn't quite understand yet. And it was so helpful. Like, I just, and in all of my, I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, you had a conversation with Peter Levine. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it's just all the OG people. These are like OG trauma people. And now here I am. It's amazing.
That's awesome. All right. Before we go, in addition to your book, Shithouse, a memoir, can you share another book that's been inspiring you, or that has inspired you, whether trauma related or yoga related or not?
Yeah. Can I share 2?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, so the first one is, I think that the most important one that really breaks down like a pretty elementary understanding of trauma, because it can be really hard to understand, right? Is like, what's happening in my neurology, is Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. Like, if people can really understand, first and foremost, we're animals, and we revert to some of those animalistic behaviors and tendencies without even knowing that we're doing it. And he gives some really amazing examples of how we end up going into certain states through medical trauma, through like, he just breaks it down super easy to understand. The other book is written by Kimberly Ann Johnson, and it's called Call of the Wild, How to Heal Trauma, Awaken Our Power, and Use It for Good. And she also is an SE, a somatic experiencing practitioner. She's a birth doula. She wrote another book before this book called The Fourth Trimester, but she also breaks down a pretty easy to understand kind of step-by-step process to like just looking at your nervous system. And that's the thing, is like, if we could, when we can understand things, we're empowered. We have choices and we have agency. And that's the opposite of a trauma state.
Right, right. Yeah, she's been on the podcast before, Kimberly.
Amazing.
She's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, look, we'll have all this linked up at the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. And love to have you back.
Yeah. Would love it.
At a different time. And,
yes.
You're awesome.
Thank you. You too. And awesome. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing.
I appreciate it. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.